Are you guys ready for some more Fury of Dracula content? Well, too bad, you're getting a Windward theme review. Now, I wanted to do a theme review of Windward because I recently got the game, saw a bunch of gameplay of it, played it myself, and thought, hey, that's a pretty good game. But I think a lot of people would see a game like this and think, oh, look at that game. It has such good theme. The art is so pretty. The world building is so cool. There are so many things you can do in the game. Isn't it thematic? Well, not necessarily, because what you were describing is not theme. If you're a fan of the channel, you know that theme is how good a game's mechanics tell the story of the game. And that is not necessarily the same thing as good art and good world building. This is actually a really good example of showing that. Because it's not as simple of an answer as to say, does it have good theme or does it not? We need to go card by card, component by component. I will try to go quickly. Board Game Geek and the internet don't have a whole lot of images of every card in the game, so I will try to do my best. And we will start with the items. Now, a lot of these items are really good in how thematic they are. Let's start with the harpoon. So the harpoon gives you +1 hit when battling a crester, which makes sense. This is a very well designed card in terms of theme. Harpoons are useful against the big flying fish monsters, not good against boats because that is how it was in the era. When fighting whales, you didn't really use harpoons on other boats, but you could use them on whales. It makes sense that it can be used in that dimension. And that is makes that it's a good, well-designed card. It doesn't give you a whole lot of power because something like heated shot is better. Molten cannonballs can be used against other ships or whales, and it is good. Well, flying whales in this case, the cresters. And it gives the most hits of any of the things, except for the countermeasures, which we'll get into. And it makes sense. The harpoon and the heated shot are expendable things, which is actually really important because the supplies are not upgrades. They are things that you use and then have spent, and then they are gone. You have thrown the harpoon. You have fired the heated shot. Good job in that design. And then we get to swivel gun, which is not an ammo type or a thing that it is expended. It is a gun. It is a thing that you shoot. Now, I know a lot of you people are not Americans and may not understand how guns work, but guns, when you shoot and use them, still exist. They do not cease to have their being be a thing. You have not thrown the gun over there. You are not throwing a swivel gun at a giant whale beast. But in this game, you spend a swivel gun, and then it is gone. Now, I understand that swivel guns were a big deal in the era that this game takes inspiration from. So having them as a thing in the game is like, hey, look at this cool new better technology that you get to use. But as an expendable resource, it's super dumb and not thematic. It's almost anti-thematic. At least it's a combat card. And this isn't something that like gives an extra action or something ridiculous like that, but it's really just bad design. I'm sorry, but having it as an expendable resource is a bad design. How hard would it have been for the person making this game to type the word rocket here? That's just like so few button presses. And that makes sense. It's like, oh, I have shot a rocket. It is a thing I have expended and used for a combat bonus. This makes sense to me. But you do not destroy a gun when you use it. That's just not how guns work. And also, this looks more like a deck gun than a swivel gun. But I don't want to get into more of the problems with this. Now, something like countermeasures. That makes sense to a degree, but this has a different problem. If you are a fan of the channel, you will know what the problem is with this, is that it has a different level of specificity than these other cards. Like Harpoon is not called weapon. Heated Shot is not called ammo. Countermeasures is at like a similar level of abstraction to those things. So I feel like countermeasures should be more specific, but that's kind of it. It still makes sense thematically. It's just violating the rules of specificity that you have. How specific should a card be? Well, it depends on how many cards are in the game. If you have a game with like 200 or 100 unique cards, you're going to have a lot of specificity. You might have a card that is Harpoon, and then another card that is like Spear Gun, and that would be okay because you're going to have a ton of combat cards with heavy specificity. But if you have just like 10 or so, or even there's like what, 8 unique cards or 9, around 10 unique supply cards in this, you want to have not super specific, and I think they sort of get a little too specific here. Like Heated Shot feels a little too specific here. Countermeasures is a little too vague. You could have called it like Mines or something like that, but honestly, it's not that bad. It makes sense that countermeasures are like a defensive thing that you like have on your ship and then you expend them when you're being attacked, but it's a little too vague and I don't fully know what is going on here. This is like a fishing pole attached to a bomb. I want to know how that works. That intrigues me, and I'm having a little bit of trouble telling the story in my brain of what happens when I play countermeasures. Okay, let's move on to coffee. Now, coffee is obviously really good. It makes sense. It's a little weird that it's arguably the most powerful supply in the game. Um, but the idea of using it and it giving extra actions makes sense. It's as if you were using people again. Coffee was a really big invention. Well, I don't want to say invention. It was really big in terms of human civilization in that it started being adopted as a drink that really affected a lot of things like the Enlightenment and other things. The degree to which it has was changed human civilization is debated, but it being a consumable that gives you more energy makes sense. It is weird to me that you can use coffee and rum in the same effects for different effects when one is a stimulant and the other is a relaxant. Um, so if I were designing this game with my stupid levels of thematicness, I would say that you can't use coffee and rum in the same round. I don't know if that would change the game significantly. I think it would be kind of interesting. Um, and maybe even be a justifiable nerf to both of those cards, as they are both very strong. But overall, good card, well designed. And rum, which is unfortunately not on this list, I think I have a picture of it here. Uh, rum is, you would think, just as good, but I have a few things to say about it. So, rum ups morale, which I'm not an alcoholic, but as I understand, it does do that, and the idea of rewarding crew with alcohol is a thing that is common in the era. I believe the technical nautical term is splicing the main brace. Um, so that makes sense, and obviously it's a consumable, so it works as a consumable, unlike swivel deck gun or swivel gun or whatever it's called. Um, Now, the morale mechanic, I appreciate that they've gone with an abstracted system for measuring damage. Morale is basically your hit points, and because you take damage from just being at sky or being in battles, it's like this is a measure of how energetic your crew is, how much ability and will they have to keep going, how close they are to mutiny, how well they're being supplied. It's kind of a catch-all term for all of those things. So morale works in sense, rum works in sense in that regard, and you could have the idea that they're getting injured in battle, and you use rum as like a medicine to clean up wounds, which is a common thing in video games. And yes, alcohol can be used as a medicine. All of that makes sense. A lot more goes into morale than just happiness, though, and I think that's something that people don't quite understand. Um, but overall, it's a good card. It's a little weird that it can be a replacement for just straight damage when so much goes into morale than just like how happy your crew is. Because it's not just a measure of happiness; it's also a measure of like injury and damage and like how many crew you have on the deck. But that is more an issue with how abstract you want the damage to be, and that's more of a design choice than a theme choice. So I will stop saying words. Now, fuel, which I believe we have here. Now, fuel, at first I look at fuel and I had a real problem with fuel. And you would think, well, what's the problem? Well, the problem would be, wouldn't all of these ships have fuel? Shouldn't this be called extra fuel or emergency fuel or something like that? Because you want to have supplies be a thing that you wouldn't normally take. It's like if this, it's like, oh, this ship has balloons now. this ship has crew now. Oh, we didn't have those things before. It's a good thing we have that now. It's like, how did the ship fly before? But actually, I'm okay with it in this regard because in the game, they're sailing ships. They're primarily using sails to be propelled. And during this era, which is like the mid 1800s, there is the start of the adaptation of paddle boats and steamboats as a supplement to wind because they were still unreliable. And so the idea of being able to use that, but it not be the main way you get about, sails being the main way you get about, but you can, if you want, have the propellers. I actually love that. It's super thematic. You spend the fuel for speed. It's a little weird that you can't go against the wind with it because if it is just power from your own vessel, maybe you should be able to go against the wind there. But I'm fine with that. That is overall pretty good and honestly really thematic to the era when you understand that these are primarily sailing vessels. I would prefer if it said propeller fuel, but that's not a problem. Okay, let's talk about bait, which is not on this screen, but is. Does this not have bait either? Okay, I promise bait is a card in this game. And what bait does, I have all the cards in front of me right here. Place a gray crester on a feeding ground space of your choice. So at first I had a problem with this card because you could use it to just like place a gray crester in some random place where your boat isn't. And that is a problem with this card. That doesn't feel thematic. This is not teleporting bait. But generally speaking, the way that you want to use this card is to place it in a space next to a ship that you have so that you can then immediately fight that gray crester. There are occasions when you might not want to do that, but since you primarily are going to use it to spawn a gray crester next to where you are, that still feels thematic. You're throwing out bait, you're attracting these monsters, and then you are fighting them. That's cool. Personally, I think it would be cool if this card had other abilities, like being able to move a gray crester or a red crester 2 spaces in a direction. That could be funny, because right now it feels maybe a little weak, but I don't know enough about the game, I think, to make that pronouncement. We are judging theme here, and in terms of theme, it makes sense. You might think it's a little weird that you are increasing the population of cresters by throwing bait out, but I like the idea of you needing to make sure that there's a proper population of cresters, and also sometimes you want to leave food out so that they are able to reproduce more rapidly, and this card represents that as well. That's good. Okay, let's talk about arrow generator. So in terms of theme, this is really, really bad. What is this? What does it do? I mean, I understand you get to re-roll the wind dice. What does that mean? What, is this a device? Is this a resource? Is this like a machine that generates wind? How is that different than the fuel for your propeller that's generating thrust? Is this some sort of sacrifice you make to the wind spirits to change the wind? Is it some sort of sensor that senses which way the wind is going and is able to make predictions and give you information so that you are able to adjust your heading accordingly, and that is represented in terms of mechanics as the wind changing? But if so, why does that affect everyone else? Again, I'm not saying change the effect of the card. I'm saying in terms of theme, what is this? I don't know, and that's really, really bad. I don't understand what I am expending. And it sounds like a machine, like swivel gun. So why am I expending this? It would not have been hard for you to change these words and type out almanac, which is what this card should be. Now you may look at me and say, Quincy, how am I looking at you? You haven't shown me your face. That's a weird sentence. Also, an almanac is a book. How is that being expended? Doesn't that have the same problem as swivel guns and theoretically arrow generator? No, 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 no. Almanacs were, in a way, things that you would expend. They would predict a certain amount of months or years into the future, different events in terms of weather patterns and other things based on history and based on the farmers and the scientists of that era. Their predictions and the degree to which they were accurate is debatable and varied, but sometimes they would be able to give useful information as to the future by looking at the past. And the degree to which they were very much like newspapers in the sense that you would get one for a certain amount of time and then you would get new ones for future amounts of time. So you having multiple almanacs would be multiple amounts of subscriptions to this newsletter or newspaper in the future, giving you accurate information into the future. And so they are an expendable resource in that regard. And that at least tells a story. That is like, oh, I have these books and charts and such that tell me how the wind blows and tells me, oh, the wind is going to change in, 8 days because of this storm tends to come in at this time, and that results in these things, and so we think it's going to cause a southeastern breeze. That tells a story. That makes sense. That is a thing that is like, okay, I get it. And since it's a almanac, it makes sense that you are detecting a change in the wind and that would affect everybody. I don't understand how an arrow generator is changing the wind for everybody, but if I have an almanac that is at least telling me that the wind is going to change, that is better. I still don't like the whole I'm playing a card that is changing the wind, haha, I'm the allies from Red Alert 2 who can change the wind, but that's at least something. Arrow Generator isn't anything. It might as well be magic. And it's not good design. It is not good game design. Now, there are two or some other cards from the expansion which I don't have. One of them is False Flag, which is a card that lets you get out of a combat. I hate that in terms of the design. That is horribly, horribly designed because that works on the cresters. How is it that these sky monsters come up to you and you're like, wait, no, we're Dutch. See our Dutch flag? And the sky monster, who's like this Kraken Leviathan ship eating thing, is like, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. We feral beasts have a treaty with the Dutch and cannot attack them. What? What? It doesn't make sense. Also, even against other ships, false flags were usually used as like a pretext of being able to attack other people and as a surprise attack because you would still board another ship and talk to them. It's not like you're like, hey, look, we're Dutch, don't talk to us. Unless, like, I don't know, the other ship hates the Dutch. I don't know. I have a lot of Dutch ancestry, so I have a license to be funny about them. And the other card is Deadweight, which I think lets you move into the drift spaces, which makes no sense to me. Why does carrying more weight let you move into the spaces with the unblockable terrain with the flying islands? I guess the idea is you were throwing over dead weight and that lets you go higher, but that's not how aeronautics works because why didn't you just not bring it in the first place and then you could fly over it? I get the idea of you get rid of dead weight and that makes you go higher, but why does bringing that dead weight in the first place give you the ability to fly into the spaces, fly higher? That does not make sense. Maybe call it extra lifting gas or lifting gas, but again, that sort of gets into the problem of, oh, we didn't bring any lifting gas ahead of time, so call it extra lifting gas. I would have loved it if the card was called grappling hooks, because I am definitely a big believer in the donkey school of thought that every game is better with grappling hooks in it. And so the idea is that you're anchoring yourself to some of these floating islands so that you are able to better maneuver and you sort of do this leapfrog thing where you anchor into one, hold yourself steady, and then you anchor into the next one and move on, and you're able to sort of protect yourself from crashing into some of the other ones. But that may be too complicated to include. Just call the card lifting gas. It shouldn't be hard. Okay, that's all the supplies. So overall, pretty good. Let's talk about the crewmen and crew women, because apparently this game was made by Marxist revolutionaries who wanted to abolish all differences between men and women and have nothing but soulless worker for the good of the revolutionary state. Ah, man, I hate communism. But you didn't hear me to rant. You didn't come here to hear me rant about Marxist, communist, socialist, mercantilist monarchies. And yes, those are all the same thing. They changed the name to try to confuse you. You came to hear me talk up to you about themes. So let's talk about the different workers. So I'm going to start with coxswain and harpooner because those are actually both pretty good. Coxswain is a person who drives boats, the small boats. And so it's like, oh, you have a good coxswain who can train your crew how to ride boats better. They are better at riding and rowing the boats and handling all of that, so they generate a turn. That makes sense to me. That's good. The harpooner is the guy who throws the harpoons, or it would probably be shooting the harpoons in this case. And he is good at it in this case, and it only helps the small boats that can fight other small boats. Which, yeah, I guess this makes a little bit of not sense. If the harpooner is good for longboat strength, which is good against white cresters and other longboats, shouldn't the harpoon card be good for helping you against gray cresters and other longboats? Yeah, I'm going to say that. I rescind my A rating for the harpoon and say that it should also be usable against other longboats. in terms of theme. Maybe it's not good in terms of balance. But overall, these are good. Okay, the Marine and the Sergeant. Okay, this you're getting into a little bit of trouble. So the Marine does not make sense. Okay, yes, Marines are what you call the soldiers on the boats, but it's a little more complicated than that. In this era, the Marines' primary job was to protect the captain and the officers from and to enact discipline on the crew. They were kind of like the personal guard of the captain and the officers to protect them in the case of mutiny. And yes, they would fight when there were boarding attempts, but so would everyone. They keep track of the small arms and that sort of thing. So why do they help fighting against the sea monster? But only the red ones, not the gray ones, and not other boats. I mean, I would think a Marine would help you against other boats, too. Why is it only the red sea monsters, or sky monsters? That really does not make sense. That's not good design. So what would you name it? Well, you wouldn't want to call it Cannoneer, because that would have all the same problems. You wouldn't want to call it, like, Tactician, because again, you have to pick something that is specific to red cresters, and that's hard. So I would call this card Hunter. And you show a picture of some grizzled hunter who's like, oh yeah, this guy knows how to hunt red cresters. He helps you against red cresters. Anything else is too general to not justify the specificity of the ability. And then you could call Marine Sergeant, because Sergeant it's just way too specific to these. Like, that's a specific rank. And yeah, some of these other things are also ranks, but they're primarily describing jobs. Sergeant doesn't really describe a job, it describes a military rank. So I would call it Marine, or you could call it Cannoneer, but which really feels like what it should be. Given the level of specificity that these other ones have, I would call this card Cannoneer. Because it's the idea that when you get surprised attacked, the Cannoneer didn't have a chance to sight in the guns and prepare the guns, or maybe even load the guns, and so he doesn't give you a bonus on defense. But having a good Cannoneer does help on offense when you have a time to get all the guns ready. I would call this Cannoneer, I would call this Hunter, and there it is. Now, Purser. Yes, this is a good name for this job. A purser is the person who keeps track of all of the supplies and goods and such in the boat, so they would let you have more supplies, because they organize things better, and they're sort of like a ship accountant. Not a lot of people know what a purser is, though, and I feel like this is a lost opportunity to call it either the carpenter or the engineer, which it feels weird that you don't have one of these, one of those on here, because that seems like a known and well important job. And since this ability is pretty vague, there's a bunch of different things that you could give this ability to, and it would make sense to. Oh, the engineer is able to better equip and manage installing the various weapons and gadgets that we have on the ship, and so he's able to fit another one on. Or the carpenter is better able to manage the design of the ship and find space that we weren't able to use in order to store more stuff. Either of those could work, especially if we're wanting to change gas worker, which absolutely should be changed, because gas worker sounds like a working title, a default title, because they couldn't come up with a cool name yet. Like, oh, why don't you call this boat worker? Why don't you call this military worker? Why don't you call this hold worker? It's so generic. What does a gas worker do? Call this chemist. Or really what this is somebody who's good at butchering the cresters. You could call it a butcher, but that seems a little weird to have on a ship. What is the name of the type of person who cut guts and cleans the fishes when on a fishing boat? They're not called gas workers. But I would like the idea of calling this a chemist. So you have engineer and chemist, and it's like, oh, this is the scientist part, the type of unit. These are the military ones, these are the boat ones, and these are the scientist ones. And it's like, oh, do you want to try to have crew that are better at like designing the ship and are good engineers, or crew that are good at dealing with the gas and the actual creatures you're fighting and call it a chemist or a meteorologist or something that evokes something. What is a gas worker? They work better at gas. Look at them do gas so good. I don't know. Like a harpooner, I know what a harpooner does, and a coxswain, I know what it is because I looked it up. And even the marine and the sergeant, there's this idea of these are people who fight well, these are people who lead well. There's at least a sense of a distinction here. I don't know what a gas worker is. The original, it had like veteran for. Also, this is better art. Goodness, can I use this art instead? I love this art way more than this sissy stuff here. Oh man, that marine looks so much cooler. This is older art. Also, is that a misspelling of sergeant? Yeah, it is. That's funny. Um, yeah, and veteran is obviously a horrible, horrible, horrible title. That is not anywhere near the same level of specificity that these other cards have. Oh, that harpooner, man, This looks just lame. This looks like some weird sci-fi stuff. This looks so much. Why couldn't we have had this art? Okay, yeah, veteran is obviously really bad. Purser is better. I really feel like it should say engineer, and this should be chemist. Okay, so we talked about that. Let's talk about the achievements. Oh boy, now we're gonna get Rage Quincy. What is this? What is this? What is this? What is this and this and this? What are any of these? Why on earth are you wasting space to say achievement? At the beginning of the game, you draw two achievements and push them down. This provides zero information to the player, these words. So you have used up space where you could call this circumnavigation. And then this is the thing that you need to do. And you call this one test equipment. Oh, you use your equipment and you get points for testing it. And then you have, well, this one's actually not in the game. This is not gotten rid of. I actually have the real ones that are in my hand right now. So use 5 supply cards before your rest phase. Oh, call that test equipment. Initiate 3 battles. Ooh, call that one war of attrition. Oh, so it's not about winning the battles. You're just trying to do wars of attrition against the various foes. Initiate 3 battles. Move 15 spaces in one turn. Call that one circumnavigation. I'm basically coming up with these out of my head. I've thought about it a little bit, but it's not hard to type those words instead of a word that helps you literally not at all. Defeat 2 Grey Cresters in one turn. Call that one thin the ranks. Or thin the population. Move a Grey Crester onto a Zephyr. Call that meteorological research. Like, ooh, we have a special experiment we're wanting to do by moving a Grey Crester onto a Zephyr. Pick up 2 gas pockets in one turn. Call that one establish outposts or something. Hire all 3 crew members. Call that one establish guild or something like that. Like, ooh, that actually is telling a story of like, hey, I've established a guild. Hey, I've done meteorological research. Hey, I did circumnavigation. Reach 20 or more hits in a single battle. You could call that become a veteran or combat resource or make an example or something. Like literally anything. Literally anything would be better than the meaningless word achievement that provides no information to the player and does nothing but then make you think, man, it would be better if somebody typed words. And this is why I get so angry about this. Drawing a cool picture, hard. Designing a cool game, hard. Testing a game to make it balanced, hard. Pressing buttons on your keyboard to make a word interesting should be the easiest thing in the world. I am not good at designing games. I am not a very smart man, but I know how to push a button on a computer to make a word and have that word be literally anything. Come on, this shouldn't be hard. And the reason I'm complaining so much is this is a really good game, and it should be held to a higher standard. But you know what? Every game should be held to a higher standard because this should be the bare minimum. And like this is the default art that you're looking at, but the actual final game art on the card, it has art. It has cool design. It even has more space for putting words. And it says nothing. It does not tell a story. A wise man once said, failure. Okay, next one. Speaking of failure, these are the boats. These boats have abilities. Like, ooh, this one, when you rest, you get 2 morale. And when you take the morale gaining action, you get 2 morale. And this boat, its longboats are faster. And this one has a ability which I think is kind of weak, where you can get a cannon instead of a morale at the end of the turn. Oh, and this one lets you take 5 supply. Okay. Now, I understand you don't have space to, like, name these abilities. But you know what would be great? How about, like, a name of the ship instead of it just being green, purple, red, yellow. There should be character behind the ships. There's room. You can put a name of a ship right here. This is empty space. It's a cargo hold. You have space. How hard is it to name this one the Nest, the Flying Nest, or something like, oh, it's good at boats. It's like got a bunch of them, the Nest, or this one the Royale. It's like, oh, that's like a royal ship that is highfalutin, and the crew there are stronger, so they get morale faster. Or this one the Thunderer or something, so it has more cannons. Like literally anything. It's the same problem as this. It would be great to have literally anything as the names of these ships, and that would be cool. And the flip sides of these boards have this really cool art that's so well designed that I'm not going to look up right now. Look it up yourself or buy the game, which you should because it's a good game and you can get it actually really cheap right now on Amazon. And it's really cool art. And you don't have to have like a bio or something for the ship. That would be cool, or just anything, so I understand where these abilities are coming from. What is happening when I'm getting to morale, or getting 5 supplies, or instead of getting morale, getting a cannon? What is going on in terms of a story? I can try to think something up, but it should be the job of the game to do that. Okay, and last, and second, and most of all least, what is this? What is this? Now, if you don't know the game, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but stuff in the game has names. And it's generally very cool. Oh, you have the teeth, the cresters. You have gas. You have cannons. Which, I want to get into cannons in just a minute. But these are called +2 tokens. You get these for losing a battle. Now, you could have called these cards experience tokens. You could have called them veterancy tokens. You could have called them vengeance tokens. Each of those gives me an idea of what they represent. My crew has lost a battle, and it has learned things via that loss because defeat teaches you more than victory, and now my crew is a little better at fighting. Or, oh, my crew has lost a battle, and they are enraged, and they wish to have vengeance against that dang white whale, and that will make them more determined to fight. All of those are cool. All of those are interesting ideas. I'm not telling you what to pick. Pick literally anything, but calling the token a +2 token, especially when this is something that can fall off of your ship and float in the air, that makes no sense. If you call it experienced crew, then it does make sense. Like, oh, this ship has sunk and its experienced crew have been marooned. I can go rescue them and they will fight for me and give me that +2 bonus. How? How do you not call these tokens literally anything? Okay, I want to talk real quick about cannons. Why are cannons one-shots? That's not how cannons work. Cannons are things that you can fire and then reload after about a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, depending on it varies, and then you can fire again as long as you have ammo. Why are cannons a one-shot? Now, this deals with the sort of problem that often happens with games where you want to include a cool part of the game, and so you're like, oh, I want to include this thing as like a thing that you can buy, this equipment. But you have to ask the question, what was the ship using before that? It's like very often in games you'll have like a rifle or a pistol that you get. It's like, wait, but you can fight without a rifle and a pistol against guys with guns. What are you using as your default? Now, some games actually give you a default. Some games just sort of ask you to squint. Some games actually have a really interesting idea where it's like, no, before you get like a proper gun, you're fighting unarmed, and there's like special rules for it. So it's like, what are you doing when you have no cannons? How are you fighting? Which is why, really, these should be rockets or torpedoes. Again, I said that the swivel gun should be called a rocket. Maybe call the swivel gun a torpedo. These should be rockets. And it's like, oh, I have fired a rocket or a torpedo, and I've spent that thing. It has been used. It has ceased to exist. It has given me a combat bonus. That makes sense. But cannons being one-shots? No. Your ship should have the innate cannons. If you have no cannons, what is firing the harpoons? What is firing the heated shot? I ask you that. Designer of this game, whose name I don't want to look up because I don't want to embarrass you. Come on. It should not be hard. Get the words right. Um, I wish I could say something else right now to make it sound like I don't hate this designer or hate this game. I really like this game. I think it's really good, and you should get it. But for all of you game designers out there, stop making bad theme. Stop having pretty art and pretty world building and thinking that that means a game is thematic, because it's not. But I really like this game and you should get it and it's super fun. Godspeed.